I want to start off by reminding everybody I'm not a therapist. I'm just like a therapy nerd, trauma nerd, but I'm happy to answer this as best as I can. So this was on an emotional incest video, and it's like asking why might you struggle with calling emotional incest, covert incest, abuse. And I think there are lots of different reasons for lots of different people, and only you can know for sure what comes up for you, but I can think of several possibilities, and then maybe you can kind of see what resonates with you. And try not to make this a crazy long video, so I'll just say really briefly, I think that discrediting or undermining our own trauma or our own abuse is like extremely common, if not just the norm, with anybody who's been through abuse or trauma. Especially if it happened when they were a kid, because your normal is your normal, and it is normal for children to blame themselves instead of being able to blame their parents. It's like an attachment thing. I can go into that more on a different video if I need to, but on emotional incest in particular, I do think it can be tricky to spot, because I think with so many aspects of emotional abuse, really, it's something that often can be very hidden from extended family, from neighbors, from people at school. And you grow up in a home where your community members seem to think you're this like great little family, that can really add to your inability to see your own pain as valid. Silently Seduced book talks a lot about how there is a real duality with this trauma, and that kids who experience this feel very special, very loved, very kind of like put on a pedestal of like, I am so special and I have this really important relationship with my mom or with my dad. And so it can really feel like a privilege to kids. And it makes sense to me, even though I haven't like gone through this, that if your abuse gets packaged with this like right side by side, twisted all up in it, is also this thing of I am so special for getting this. That like I'm so powerful and important, and that would make it really, really hard to look at that overall package and go, that's abuse. If like half of it feels like privilege, that's really confusing. I think a lot of people and kind of culture in general tends to be very black and white thinking about abuse. So we want to think that somebody who is an abusive parent would just kind of be this bad guy, like this villain. And that is not at all how I think most abuse works, honestly. But especially emotional incest, like they are causing harm, but it is through almost too much love, or like a form of love that is too mature. Not necessarily like overtly sexually inappropriate, but it's too much for a child. Overwhelming a child with your presence and with too much emotional connection and too much emotional intimacy is not at all like the stereotype of what we would think abuse looks like. Just generally, we think love and closeness and affection are good. That is love. There might be an added layer of this for people who have this experience with their father, because I think the standard of what we expect from dads, I think it's getting a little bit better, but certainly in the past was a lot less than what we expected of moms. Like I've heard even like modern dads say, if they take their kid to the grocery store, like 3 different people will stop and tell them what a great dad they are for just like getting groceries with their child. So when we see any amount of involvement or engagement from a father, like directly hands-on caring for his children as a sign of a great dad, then I think it would make emotional incest from a father particularly hard to spot, because most people are going to go, oh my gosh, he's close to his child, like what a great dad, and then that's all that they see. They don't see that it goes too far. The way that people are childish, ageist towards children, dehumanize children, factors into this. I think that a lot of people still don't really recognize emotional abuse or emotional neglect as valid traumas for children. Like, I think most people would recognize that if a husband is telling her wife to shut up and go to bed, that is abuse and that is harmful. But there is still like a portion of society that would say like, that's just a mom having a bad day, you shouldn't judge her, that's not abuse, that's not trauma. Which to me is wild, because emotional incest is kind of under the bigger umbrella of emotional abuse. Or I guess it's kind of under emotional abuse for sure, but then also a little bit under the sexual abuse spectrum. But also, people don't really think of covert sexual abuse as sexual abuse. That's something that I like talk about in here. I have a lot of covert sexual abuse that was not emotional incest. And a lot of, like, I've gotten people telling me that it doesn't count as sexual abuse. And I haven't had anybody say that about any other kind of trauma I've talked about on here, but people really want to say that like if somebody didn't grape you or like physically touch you, then nothing else counts as sexual abuse, and that's just not true. But that's kind of the standard of what people think of as sexual abuse. And so even emotional incest that does skew quite sexual in nature, people a lot of times aren't going to validate it. So I guess, long story short, I think emotional incest can include a type of sexual abuse that's not really well recognized, and a type, and emotional abuse of any kind often just isn't well recognized. And so it's just kind of like a double whammy of types of abuse that aren't well understood, aren't well respected, but that doesn't make them any less valid.